The coffee shop glowed against the December night frost, creeping patterns across the windows. Victoria Brennan sat across from a man her mother had arranged for her to meet 3 weeks earlier at a charity gala. Outside, snow fell in uneven flakes, catching the light from street lamps and the white bulbs strung along the shop's awning. Inside, soft music drifted from speakers mounted in corners, competing with the hiss of the espresso machine and the murmur of other conversations happening at other tables in other lives. Robert Ashford had been talking for 25 minutes without pause. He owned a chain of car dealerships across the Midwest, properties in 3 states, plans to expand into Colorado by spring. His watch caught the light when he gestured, expensive and deliberate. Victoria nodded at intervals she'd learned to time perfectly over the years. She sipped coffee that had gone lukewarm in her hands. She watched the way his eyes moved past her when he spoke, addressing someone just over her shoulder who wasn't there. He hadn't asked her a single question, not about Technova Solutions, the company she'd built from a startup into an enterprise software firm employing 320 people. Not about the board meeting she'd led that morning or the client presentation she'd spent the previous weekend preparing. Not about anything that made up the fabric of her days, the architecture of her life. The silence of his curiosity felt louder than his voice. Robert leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest. The movement had the quality of a decision being made, a door closing before anyone could walk through it. His voice didn't change pitch or tone when the words came. "You're too old for every man, Victoria." The ceramic cup felt solid under Victoria's palms, an anchor in a moment that wanted to tilt sideways. She didn't move, didn't blink, just held the cup and stared at the grain of the table between them, the small scratch near the edge that someone else had made on some other night. Robert kept talking. His tone stayed flat, conversational, like he was commenting on the weather or the traffic on Lakeshore Drive. Most men wanted someone younger, he said. Someone who could give them a family. Someone with less baggage, fewer complications, more time left on the biological clock that everyone seemed to track with the precision of accountants. He'd been honest with her mother about his concerns, he said, but Margaret had insisted they meet anyway. He didn't see the point in wasting time when the math didn't add up, when the fundamentals weren't there. His fingers drummed once against his forearm, impatient with the formality of finishing a coffee he hadn't touched in 10 minutes. Victoria set the cup down carefully, both hands required for the simple task. She didn't trust herself to speak. Her throat felt tight, her chest burned with something that might have been anger, if it hadn't felt so much like shame. She had heard worse before, though not often with this particular blend of indifference and certainty. Her ex-husband had said similar things 8 years ago, though David had wrapped the message in apology, and what he'd insisted was regret. He'd wanted children and couldn't see a future without them. Couldn't keep pretending it didn't matter when clearly it mattered more than anything else. More than 12 years of marriage, or the house they'd painted together, or the life they'd built brick by brick. Victoria had signed the divorce papers in the kitchen of that house on a Tuesday afternoon in March, her suitcase from the Boston conference still unpacked in the bedroom upstairs. She'd waited until she was alone in her car, parked in the garage they'd always meant to organize, before she let herself cry. Since then, she'd stopped dating, stopped trying, stopped believing that trying would lead anywhere except back to this same conversation with different men in different coffee shops. Her mother kept calling, kept setting up introductions, kept reminding her that time was a luxury women didn't have. That compromise was necessary, that being alone was a choice. Victoria was making out of stubbornness rather than circumstance. Victoria had learned to endure it, to sit through dinners and coffee meetings with men who looked at her like a problem to solve or a box that wouldn't check. She'd learned to smile politely and leave without making a scene to get in her car and drive home and pour herself wine she wouldn't finish while the silence of her apartment settled around her like a familiar coat. But tonight something cracked. She looked up at Robert. He was scrolling through his phone now, his attention already elsewhere, the conversation over in his mind, even if his body hadn't left the table yet. Victoria opened her mouth to say something, anything. The words formed in her throat but didn't make it past her lips because someone was walking toward their table. Marcus Reed had been sitting in the corner of Lakefront Coffee for the past hour and 12 minutes. His laptop was open in front of him, the screen glowing with terminal windows and server dashboards that most people would have mistaken for gibberish. Technova Solutions security team had called him 90 minutes ago. Panicked voices overlapping on the conference line. Ransomware attack. Files encrypted. Ransom demand. Deadline at midnight. The kind of crisis that could cost the company $2 million in downtime if someone didn't know exactly what they were doing. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing. He'd isolated the infected servers first, creating a mirror backup before the encryption could spread further into the system. The attackers had used AES-256, which sounded sophisticated until you understood they'd implemented it with rookie mistakes, predictable patterns that someone with enough experience could unravel. Marcus had spent 15 years building that experience, working his way up from help desk to systems administrator to the director of IT security, learning every layer of the infrastructure from the inside. He'd run the decryption sequence from the coffee shop because his apartment was too quiet to work in and the office felt too exposed. Too many people watching him work, asking questions he didn't have time to answer. His daughter Lily was in San Diego with her mother's family for the week-long Christmas break. The apartment echoed without her drawings covering the refrigerator and her questions filling the spaces between his thoughts, and her presence reminding him that he was a father first, that nothing else mattered as much as that. So he'd come here to the white noise of other people's conversations and the smell of coffee and the anonymous comfort of a public space where nobody knew his name. His phone had lit up 17 minutes ago with a text from the security chief. Crisis averted. Systems restored. Company saved. Marcus had closed his laptop and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 hours. That's when he'd noticed the couple 2 tables away. He knew who she was. Everyone at Technova knew Victoria Brennan. She ran board meetings with precision, made decisions fast, and expected results faster. Commanded rooms without raising her voice. People respected her. Some were intimidated by her. Marcus had only spoken to her a handful of times. Usually in passing or during department reviews where he'd present security updates and she'd ask questions that proved she'd actually read his reports. 3 weeks ago, her laptop had crashed in the middle of a board meeting. Marcus had been in the room fixing a network issue when he'd heard the small sound she'd made, frustration and panic mixed together. He'd crossed to her chair, saw the corrupted drive, and spent 15 minutes recovering the presentation data, while the board members waited and checked their phones and pretended not to watch. When he'd handed her laptop back with everything intact, she'd looked at him. Really looked at him. Not the way executives usually glanced at IT staff seeing the function, but not the person. She'd met his eyes and said his name, her voice quiet but certain. Marcus Reed. I won't forget this. Thank you. Then she'd smiled, brief and genuine, and gone back to her presentation like nothing had interrupted it. Since then, they'd passed each other in hallways sometimes. Eye contact that lasted a beat longer than casual. Small nods of mutual recognition. Nothing that meant anything except that she'd remembered his name and he'd started noticing when she walked past. Now she was sitting across from a man whose voice cut through the ambient noise of the coffee shop like glass breaking. Marcus couldn't hear all of it, but he caught fragments that made his hands tighten on his closed laptop. Too old. Biological clock. Waste of time. He saw Victoria's shoulders stiffen, saw her fingers go white around the coffee cup, saw the way she looked down at the table like she was trying to disappear into it. The man kept talking, his tone flat and bored. He checked his phone. He looked around the shop like he was already planning his exit. Already moving past this moment into whatever came next in his evening. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition he didn't want, but couldn't ignore. 3 years ago, his ex-wife Stephanie had told him at their kitchen table that he was a good father but a boring husband. Her exact words. She'd been sitting where she always sat, the chair by the window, her hands folded on the table between them like she was at a business meeting. Marcus had been working 60-hour weeks that year, trying to prove himself worthy of promotion, trying to demonstrate value that maybe he'd never had in the first place. "You work too much," Stephanie had said, her voice even and certain. "You're not ambitious enough. You'll never be more than IT support." She'd met someone else, a senior partner at her law firm. Someone with the kind of resume and salary and future that apparently mattered more than 9 years of marriage, or a 7-year-old daughter, or the life they'd built together. Stephanie had announced the divorce at his company's holiday party, walking out with the man while everyone watched, and then pretended they hadn't. The custody battle had followed, her lawyer arguing that Marcus was a workaholic father who put his job before his daughter, that Lily deserved a mother who could be present. Marcus had won custody by showing up, by documenting every school event, every pediatrician appointment, every parent-teacher conference, by proving that he was the one who'd been there all along while Stephanie had been building her career and her new relationship. But winning hadn't erased the public humiliation or the whispers at work or the belief that had settled into his bones like cold. He wasn't enough, not ambitious enough, not interesting enough, not worth choosing. Watching Victoria take verbal abuse from the man across from her felt like watching himself 3 years ago. Someone sitting in silence and taking it because fighting back seemed worse than enduring. Someone whose quiet dignity was being used against them, as if not making a scene was the same as agreeing with the cruelty. Marcus had spent 3 years swallowing that belief, staying quiet, being invisible, making himself smaller so other people could feel bigger. A week ago, he'd been drinking beer with Dave, his friend from high school who worked as an electrician, and Tom, who coached middle school track and had known Marcus since Lily's first day of kindergarten. They'd been at Kieran's pub on Milwaukee Avenue, the Blackhawks game on the TV. Nobody was really watching. "You gotta live for yourself, man," David said, setting his beer down harder than necessary. "Stop proving yourself to Stephanie. She's gone. She made her choice. You don't owe her anything anymore." Tom had nodded, his eyes serious behind glasses that were always slightly crooked. "You're the best father I know, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you different." Marcus had nodded and agreed and felt the words bounce off the belief that sat deeper than reason. But now, sitting in this coffee shop watching a stranger humiliate someone who didn't deserve it, those words came back with weight behind them. Live for yourself. Don't let anyone tell you different. Not this time. He closed his laptop, stood up, started walking. Victoria heard footsteps approaching but kept her eyes on the table, assuming the waiter or someone passing to the restroom. Then a hand appeared in her field of vision, reaching across the table, taking her hand, with gentle pressure that turned firm. She looked up. Marcus Reed was standing beside her. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Robert, his expression calm but his jaw set in a way that suggested the calm was a choice he was making, not a natural state. He didn't let go of Victoria's hand. "You're perfect for me." His voice was clear and deliberate, loud enough that the people at nearby tables stopped their conversations to look. The words landed in the space between them like something solid, like something that couldn't be taken back or explained away. Robert froze, his phone slipped slightly in his hand, his carefully maintained composure cracking at the edges. He stared at Marcus with the confusion of someone who'd been speaking a language nobody else understood and suddenly realized it. "What? This is inappropriate. Who are you?" Marcus didn't move, didn't explain. He just stood there holding Victoria's hand, his eyes locked on Robert, waiting. Victoria's breath caught. Her hand was still in Marcus's, and she could feel the warmth of his palm, the calluses on his fingers from years of working with keyboards and servers and hardware. She didn't understand what was happening, didn't know why Marcus Reed, the IT director who'd saved her presentation 3 weeks ago, was standing in this coffee shop on Christmas Eve doing something that made no logical sense. But she didn't pull her hand away, because for the first time in 8 years, someone was standing beside her. Not behind her, not judging her, just there. Robert found his voice sputtering something about understanding what was going on, about this being his time, about not appreciating the interruption. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor loud enough to make several people turn. He grabbed his coat from the back of the seat, shoved his phone into his pocket, looked once at Victoria and once at Marcus, then turned and walked toward the door. He didn't say goodbye, didn't apologize, just left the door swinging shut behind him with a small chime that seemed too cheerful for the moment. The coffee shop was quiet. A few people were still staring. Most had already gone back to their drinks and conversations, the moment passing into just another story they might tell later or might forget entirely. The Christmas music continued playing, something instrumental and generic that nobody was listening to. Victoria looked up at Marcus. He was still holding her hand. His eyes met hers, dark and serious but not cold. There was something else there, something she couldn't name yet but recognized anyway. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overstep." His voice was quieter now, meant just for her. He started to let go of her hand, started to step back, giving her space to process what had just happened. Victoria shook her head, a small movement that felt larger than it was. "You didn't." Her throat felt tight again, but this time not from pain. From something unfamiliar that felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. She swallowed, managed to keep her voice steady when she added, "Thank you." Marcus hesitated. Then he gestured to the empty chair across from her, the one Robert had vacated, the coffee cup still half full and abandoned on the table. "Do you mind if I sit?" Victoria looked at the chair, at the space Robert had occupied with his dismissiveness and his certainty that she wasn't worth his time, at the coffee he'd ordered and never intended to drink. Then she looked back at Marcus, who was waiting without pushing, who'd just done something inexplicable and was now asking permission instead of assuming he'd earned anything by it. She nodded. Marcus sat down. He folded his hands on the table, didn't fill the silence with explanations or apologies or the kind of nervous talking that people did when they weren't sure what came next. He just sat there, present and patient. Victoria picked up her coffee cup and took a sip. It was cold now, bitter and unpleasant. She set it back down and realized she didn't know how to start this conversation. Didn't know what to say to someone who'd just interrupted a humiliation she'd been prepared to endure alone. "That was my mother's idea, the meeting, not mine." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, controlled in the way she'd learned to control everything. Marcus nodded. He didn't ask why she'd agreed to it, didn't offer advice or judgment, just listened. "She's been setting these up for a while now. She thinks I need someone, that I'm running out of time." Victoria heard the bitter edge in her own voice on those last 3 words and didn't try to hide it. Running out of time. As if her life had an expiration date, as if being 46 meant the important parts were already over. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair, his posture relaxed, but his attention sharp. "What do you think?" The question surprised her. Most people told her what she should think, what she should do, what compromises she should make. Marcus was asking like her answer actually mattered, like her opinion about her own life was relevant. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd sat down. She'd seen him around the office, knew he ran IT security, knew he was good at his job in the quiet way that people were good at things that kept systems running without anyone noticing. But she'd never noticed the lines around his eyes that spoke of exhaustion that went deeper than one late night. She'd never seen the way his shoulders carried tension even when he tried to relax. She'd never observed the faint tan line on his left ring finger where a wedding band used to be. "I think I stopped believing I had a choice a long time ago." The words came out heavier than she'd intended, weighted with 8 years of resignation and the accumulated exhaustion of trying to want things she couldn't have. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "That's not true." Victoria almost laughed. The sound didn't quite make it out, caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. She shook her head. "You don't know me." "No," Marcus agreed, his voice even. "But I know what it feels like to be not enough, like you've lost before you even started." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. She studied him, seeing him differently now, seeing the man behind the professional competence and the quiet efficiency, seeing someone who'd been where she was, who understood the specific gravity of being told you weren't worth choosing. "You're divorced." It wasn't a question. She could see the evidence in the missing ring and the practiced way he spoke about inadequacy and the recognition that had made him cross a coffee shop to defend a stranger. Marcus nodded. 3 years now. Do you regret it?" He thought about that. Really thought about it, his eyes going somewhere else for a moment before coming back to her face. "No, it was the right thing for both of us. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt." Victoria understood that better than she wanted to. She understood the difference between necessary and painless, between right and easy. She looked down at her hands, at the empty space where her own ring used to be. She'd sold it a year after the divorce, used the money to donate to a women's shelter. It had felt like the right kind of closure, like shutting a door that needed to stay shut. "Why did you do that? Why did you come over here?" Marcus met her eyes. He didn't look away, didn't deflect, didn't offer a comfortable lie that would smooth over the strangeness of what had just happened. Because no one should have to sit through that alone. The simplicity of it hit Victoria harder than elaborate explanations would have. No grand gesture, no hero complex, just basic decency offered without expectation of anything in return. She felt something shift in her chest, something small and fragile but undeniably real. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to kindness that wasn't asking for anything back. So she just nodded, and for the first time that night she didn't feel alone. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It just was present and patient, the space holding room for both of them. Victoria's hand was still on the table where Marcus had held it. She could feel the ghost of his touch, the warmth that had lingered for a moment before he'd let go. She wanted to pull her hand back, tuck it into her lap, hide the vulnerability that felt too exposed. But she left it there, resting on the table between them, and tried to steady her breathing. Marcus was watching her, not staring, just observing in the way someone did when they were waiting for the other person to decide what happened next. Victoria wasn't used to that. People usually decided for her, told her what she should do, what she should want, what she should accept. But Marcus just sat there, his hands folded, his expression patient, giving her space to just be. It made her uncomfortable, not in a bad way, but in a way that made her realize how long it had been since someone had given her room to exist without expectation or agenda. "I should go." Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended. She started to stand, reaching for her coat draped over the back of her chair. Marcus didn't move. He just looked at her with those steady eyes and said 3 words that stopped her halfway out of her seat. "You don't have to." Victoria stopped. Her fingers gripped the fabric of her coat. She stood there, caught between leaving and staying, between the safety of solitude and the risk of connection. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw the lines around his mouth that spoke of smiling even when things were hard. The fatigue in his eyes that matched her own. The way he held himself like someone who'd learned not to expect much but still showed up anyway. She sat back down. The coffee shop had emptied out some. Only a few tables were still occupied. A young couple stood near the window, their heads bent close together, whispering. An older man read a newspaper in the corner, turning pages with careful deliberation. The barista wiped down the counter, moving slowly like he was in no hurry to close up. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now, coating the sidewalks and parked cars in a thin white layer that softened the harsh edges of the city. Victoria folded her hands in her lap. She didn't look at Marcus when she spoke, keeping her eyes on the table, on the ring of moisture left by her coffee cup, on the small scratch in the wood near the edge. "My mother means well. She always has. But she doesn't understand that some things can't be fixed by trying harder." Marcus didn't respond right away. He let the words settle between them, gave them space to exist without rushing to fill the silence with platitudes or advice. "What does she think needs fixing?" Victoria almost smiled. Almost, but the expression didn't quite make it to her face. "Me." The word came out flat, factual, like she was reciting something she'd memorized long ago and had stopped questioning. She could feel Marcus's gaze on her, but kept her own eyes on the table, on anything except his face. "I was married once. For 12 years. We were happy. Or I thought we were. We had plans, a house, careers, everything except the one thing he wanted most." She stopped, swallowed. Forced herself to keep going because she'd started, and stopping now would be worse than finishing. "I couldn't have children. We tried for years, doctors, treatments, IVF, everything. Nothing worked. And eventually he stopped looking at me the same way. Stopped talking about the future, stopped pretending it didn't matter." The memory came back sharper than she expected. She could see the bedroom, the blue walls they'd painted together one summer, the suitcase open on the bed from her Boston trip. David's face, apologetic but resolute. She'd been holding a folded blouse when he'd said it, when he'd told her he'd met someone younger. Someone who could give him what she couldn't. She'd stood there with that blouse in her hands and felt the floor drop out from under her. He asked for the divorce on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just gotten back from a conference in Boston. I was unpacking my suitcase when he came into the bedroom and told me he'd met someone younger, someone who could give him a family. Victoria finally looked up at Marcus. His expression hadn't changed. No pity, no judgment, just attention that felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. "I didn't fight it. I signed the papers, sold the house, started over. And I told myself I was fine, that I didn't need anyone, that I was better off alone." She paused, her throat tight with words that had been building for 8 years. "But my mother doesn't see it that way. She sees a daughter who's running out of time, who's choosing work over family, who's going to end up alone because she's too stubborn to compromise." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table, closing some of the distance between them without crowding her space. "Is that what you think? That you're too stubborn?" Victoria considered the question, turned it over in her mind. Tested it against the belief she'd been carrying like a stone in her pocket. "No. I think I'm too tired. Too tired to pretend I'm something I'm not. Too tired to sit through dinners with men who look at me like I'm damaged goods. Too tired to keep hoping that maybe this time will be different." The words came out heavier than she'd intended, landing in her chest where they settled with the weight of truth finally spoken out loud. She looked away, suddenly embarrassed that she'd said so much, that she'd opened up to someone she barely knew in a coffee shop on Christmas Eve. But Marcus didn't look uncomfortable, didn't pull back or change the subject. He just nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what she meant. "I get that." Victoria glanced at him, waiting. Marcus looked down at his hands, at the place where his wedding ring used to be. The skin there was still slightly lighter than the rest, a pale band that hadn't fully faded even after 3 years. "My ex-wife left 3 years ago. We'd been married for 9 years. We had a daughter. Everything seemed fine. Or maybe I just wasn't paying attention to the things that weren't." He spoke carefully, choosing each word with precision, like he was navigating terrain he'd crossed before but still found difficult. "She wanted more than I could give. More time, more attention, more of me. But I was working 60-hour weeks, trying to keep up with promotions and projects, trying to prove I was worth something. And I missed what was right in front of me." Victoria watched him, saw the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way he kept his voice level even though the words clearly cost him something. "One day she told me she was done, that she'd met someone else, someone who made her feel seen. She left a month later, moved to California, left our daughter with me." He said the last part without bitterness, just fact. But Victoria heard the weight behind it, the responsibility and the loneliness and the fear of failing at the one thing that mattered most. "How old is your daughter?" 7. Her name's Lily. She's smart, funny, asks a million questions." A small smile touched Marcus's face, brief but genuine, transforming his features for a moment before fading back into the more neutral expression he usually wore. "She's with her mother this Christmas. First time in 6 months that Stephanie's had her for more than a weekend." Victoria heard what he didn't say, that he missed her, that the apartment was too quiet without her, that being a single parent meant navigating a constant tension between doing what was best for his daughter and figuring out what was left for himself. "That must be hard." Marcus nodded. "It is. But she's the best thing I've ever done. The only thing I know I got right." The honesty in his voice was almost painful, raw and undefended in a way that made Victoria feel like she was seeing something private, something he didn't show most people. She felt something crack open inside her, some small, protected place she'd kept locked for years. She looked at Marcus and saw someone who'd also been broken, who'd also been left behind, who'd also had to rebuild from nothing. "Why did you come over to my table tonight?" She asked it again, but this time the question felt different, less defensive, more curious. Marcus met her eyes. He didn't look away. "Because I know what it feels like to be told you're not enough, and I couldn't watch someone do that to you without saying something." Victoria's throat tightened. She wanted to say thank you, wanted to tell him it mattered, but the words wouldn't come, so she just nodded and Marcus seemed to understand. They sat in silence for a while. The coffee shop grew quieter as more people left, as the barista started stacking chairs on tables near the back, as the Christmas music switched to something slower and more melancholy. Outside, the snow kept falling, making the world look gentler than it was. Victoria's phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, she pulled it out. Saw 3 text messages from her mother lighting up the screen. "How did it go? Call me when you get home. Victoria, don't be picky. You're not getting any younger." Victoria stared at the words, feeling them settle over her like a familiar weight. The voice in her head that had been repeating the same message for years joined in. Too old, too broken, too late. She set the phone face down on the table and looked at Marcus. "My mother, checking in." Marcus didn't ask what the messages said. He could probably guess. The barista approached their table looking apologetic in the way service workers did when they had to deliver bad news. "Sorry, folks. We're closing in 10 minutes. Marcus nodded. He reached for his laptop bag, started gathering his things. Victoria did the same, slipping her phone into her purse, putting on her coat, buttoning it slowly. The moment was ending. Reality was pushing back in. She didn't know how to stop it. They walked to the door together. Marcus held it open for her. The cold air hit her face sharp and immediate, the snow still falling heavier now. Victoria stepped outside Marcus, following the door closing behind them with a soft click. They stood on the sidewalk, the Christmas lights from shop windows casting colored shadows on the snow. Victoria looked at Marcus. He looked back. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things they hadn't said, all the things they didn't know how to say. Victoria felt the distance growing, felt herself pulling back into the safety of isolation. It was easier that way, safer, less complicated. She started to turn away, started to say goodnight, but before she could, Marcus spoke. "Wait here." Before Victoria could ask why, he jogged across the street to a 24-hour CVS pharmacy, its bright lights harsh against the soft darkness of the snow-covered street. She watched him through the window as he disappeared into an aisle. A minute later, he emerged holding something small, paid at the counter, and crossed back to where she stood. He held out a single white rose. Not a bouquet, not some grand arrangement. Just one stem, simple and elegant, the petals perfect and unblemished against the night. Victoria took it carefully, her fingers brushing against his. The rose was cool to the touch, the petals soft and real in her hands. "I wanted to give you something to remember tonight by, to remind you that you're not what people say you are. You're more than that. You always have been." Victoria stared at the flower, at the delicate petals, at the way it caught the light from the street lamp above them. She felt tears threatening again, pushed them back. Looked up at Marcus, standing in the snow with his hands in his pockets and his eyes steady and sincere and deep. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just take it. And maybe when you look at it, remember that someone sees you, really sees you, and thinks you're exactly who you're supposed to be." Victoria's throat tightened. She held the rose closer to her chest, protecting it from the falling snow. She looked at Marcus and saw something she hadn't seen in anyone's eyes in years. Acceptance. Not tolerance, not pity, just genuine, honest acceptance of who she was, flaws and all. "I barely know you." Marcus nodded. "That's true. But I'd like to, if you'll let me." Victoria felt the walls she'd built around herself starting to crack, not breaking, not yet, but shifting, making room for possibility. She looked at the rose in her hands, at Marcus standing in the snow, at the quiet street around them, and she made a choice. Not a big one, not a dramatic declaration, just a small step forward. "I'd like that too." Marcus's smile widened just slightly. He stepped back, giving her room to walk to her car. Victoria opened the door but didn't get in right away. She looked at him one more time. "Will I see you Monday at work?" Marcus nodded. "I'll be there." "Good." She meant it. She slid into the driver's seat, set the rose carefully on the passenger seat, started the engine. The heater kicked on, blowing cold air that would warm eventually. Marcus stepped back onto the sidewalk, lifted one hand in a small wave. Victoria waved back, then pulled away from the curb and drove slowly down the snow-covered street. In her rearview mirror, she could see Marcus standing there watching her go. Not walking away yet, just standing in the snow under the Christmas lights. She turned the corner and he disappeared from view, but the image stayed with her, burned into her memory. A single moment of kindness on a night when she'd expected nothing but pain. Victoria drove through the quiet streets of Chicago. the city looking different somehow, softer. The snow had covered the rough edges, made everything look clean and new. She glanced at the rose on the passenger seat, at its perfect white petals, at the way it seemed to glow in the dim light from the dashboard. For the first time in 8 years, Victoria didn't feel hollow. She felt something else, something fragile and tentative but undeniably real. She felt hope, not the desperate, grasping kind that left her disappointed, but a quiet, steady hope that whispered maybe. Maybe she wasn't too old. Maybe she wasn't too broken. Maybe she was exactly who she needed to be. And maybe, just maybe, the right person would see that. Victoria pulled into her apartment building's parking garage, turned off the engine, and sat in the silence. The rose rested on the seat beside her. She picked it up, held it gently, brought it to her face, and breathed in its faint, sweet scent. Then she got out of the car and walked to the elevator. Rode it up to her floor, unlocked her apartment door, and stepped inside. The apartment was dark and quiet, but it didn't feel as empty as it usually did. Victoria turned on a light, found a small vase in the kitchen cabinet, filled it with water, placed the rose inside, and set it on the counter where she would see it every morning. She stood back and looked at it, at the way it stood tall and beautiful in the simple glass vase, at the way it transformed the space around it just by being there. Victoria pulled out her phone, looked at the messages from her mother still waiting unread. She could respond, could explain, could defend herself, but she didn't. Instead, she opened a new message, typed quickly before she could second-guess herself. "Thank you for tonight, for the flower, for seeing me. I'm glad you were there." She sent it to Marcus, watched the message deliver, set her phone down on the counter. She didn't know if he would respond right away, didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. She was just present in this moment with this flower, with this small, fragile hope growing in her chest. Marcus stood in his own apartment across town, Lily's drawings covering the refrigerator door, like always, her artwork the only color in the space. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out, saw Victoria's name on the screen, read the message twice. He typed back carefully, choosing words that felt right. "You don't have to thank me, but I'm glad I was there too. Sleep well, Victoria." He sent it, set the phone down, and smiled for the first time in months. A real smile, one that reached his eyes and made his face feel warm. He looked around the apartment at the space that felt less empty somehow, and thought about Monday morning, about seeing Victoria at work, about what came next. The snow continued falling over Chicago, blanketing the city in white, softening the edges of buildings and cars and streets. In separate apartments across town, 2 people lay in their beds thinking the same thought. What happens when we see each other at work? Victoria wondered if she'd just made everything complicated. Marcus wondered if he'd just risked his career. But underneath the worry was something else, something neither of them had felt in years. The possibility that maybe this time would be different, that maybe taking a risk was worth it, that maybe they deserved more than settling for less than they wanted. The city slept around them, the Christmas lights still blinking in windows, the snow still falling, and somewhere between the silence of Victoria's apartment and the quiet of Marcus's, a connection had formed. Fragile and new and uncertain, but real. And that was enough for now. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that made everything harder. Victoria sat at her desk by 7:30, the white rose in its small vase positioned where she could see it without having to turn her head. She'd moved it from the kitchen counter to her office first thing, a decision she was already questioning. The flower felt like evidence of something, though she wasn't sure what crime had been committed or who would care enough to investigate. Email notifications stacked up in the corner of her screen. Board meeting at 10, quarterly review. Gerald Thornton would be there, and Gerald Thornton never missed an opportunity to question her judgment. She sipped coffee that tasted more bitter than usual. and tried to focus on the revenue numbers that should have felt like victory. 18% growth in Q4, 3 major client wins, market share expanding in a contracting economy. None of it felt as solid as it should have. Her phone sat face down on the desk, Margaret's unanswered messages from Saturday night still waiting for acknowledgement. Victoria had learned that ignoring her mother was like ignoring weather. It didn't stop the storm from coming, just delayed when it hit. Marcus arrived at his office in the IT security wing at 8:15. His team congratulated him again on the Christmas Eve ransomware fix, 6 different people stopping by to mention the $2 million in downtime he'd prevented. He nodded and thanked them and felt like a fraud, his mind replaying the moment in the coffee shop over and over, analyzing it from angles that made less sense the more he thought about them. He'd held Victoria Brennan's hand in public. He'd made a declaration that could be interpreted a dozen different ways, none of them professional. He'd walked across a coffee shop and inserted himself into her life without invitation or planning. And now he had to see her in a building where she was CEO, and he was just another employee whose job could disappear with a signature. His phone showed one text message sent early this morning, from Victoria. Just 4 words. "See you at 10. Not a question, not an explanation. Just information delivered with the efficiency he'd observed in board meetings when she was cutting through unnecessary debate to reach decisions. He typed back 3 words. "I'll be there." Then deleted it and typed instead, "Looking forward to it." Then deleted that too and settled on, "Yes." He hit send before he could overthink it further. The elevator at 9:45 was where reality crystallized into something inescapable. Victoria stepped in, heading to the 10th floor for the board meeting. 2 other people were already inside, someone from marketing and someone from HR. The doors started to close. Then a hand caught them and Marcus stepped in. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. Victoria's expression shifted through surprise into something more controlled, professional distance reasserting itself like muscle memory. "Good morning, Marcus." Her voice carried the tone she used in department reviews, polite and impersonal, the weekend erased from her inflection. "Good morning, Ms. Brennan." He matched her formality instinctively, the Mr. Reed and Ms. Brennan barrier snapping back into place with the ease of habit. But those 2 seconds of eye contact said everything the words didn't. The elevator dinged. Victoria exited on 10. Marcus stayed inside, heading to 12, where the server room lived. The marketing employee was staring at her phone. The HR person was reading something on a tablet. Neither had noticed anything because there was nothing to notice except 2 co-workers being excessively polite on a Monday morning. Marcus's chest felt tight until the elevator doors closed again. The conference room on 10 smelled like the expensive coffee someone always ordered for board meetings, dark roast from a local place that charged twice what it was worth. Victoria took her seat at the head of the table, presentation materials. Arranged in front of her, the quarterly numbers ready to speak for themselves. Gerald Thornton sat 3 chairs down, 62 years old and built from old money and older resentments. He'd voted against her CEO appointment 4 years ago and made sure everyone knew it regularly. The meeting started on schedule. Victoria presented Q4 results with the kind of precision that usually shut down questions before they formed. Revenue growth, client retention, market position strengthening, projected Q1 numbers that exceeded the board's expectations by margins that should have made them smile. Thornton waited until she finished before leaning back in his chair. "Strong numbers, Victoria, though I have to wonder if your focus has been somewhat divided lately." The room got quieter. Other board members shifted in their seats, recognizing the setup for what it was. "My focus has been exactly where it needs to be, on company performance, which the numbers demonstrate." Victoria kept her voice level professional, giving him nothing to grab onto. Thornton smiled the way people smiled when they had ammunition they were about to use. I heard an interesting story this weekend from Robert Ashford, old friend of mine, golf buddy. He mentioned a rather awkward coffee meeting on Christmas Eve. Victoria felt ice form in her stomach but kept her expression neutral. My personal life is separate from company business. Is it because Robert mentioned you were meeting with employees inappropriately, in public, which raises questions about judgment, about boundaries, about whether personal entanglements might be affecting your professional decisions? The other board members were watching now, some with curiosity, some with the careful neutrality of people waiting to see which side would win before choosing their own position. Victoria met Thornton's eyes directly. I was on my own time in a public space having a conversation with another adult. Nothing about that meeting violated company policy or affected my ability to do this job, which again the numbers prove. Thornton shuffled papers in front of him, making a show of considering her response. Perhaps, but perception matters, Victoria. Leadership requires not just competence, but the appearance of sound judgment. When the CEO is seen in situations that raise eyebrows, it reflects on all of us. On the company's reputation. On shareholder confidence. He let that hang in the air, the implied threat clear. Victoria forced herself to breathe steadily, to not react, to give him nothing he could use. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. But the damage was done. She could see it in the way other board members avoided her eyes, in the careful way they phrased their questions, in the silence that followed Thornton's comments like confirmation. By 2 o'clock, Victoria was back in her office with the door closed and a headache building behind her eyes. Her assistant Kelly buzzed through on the intercom. "Marcus Reed from IT is here, says it's urgent." Victoria's stomach dropped. "Send him in." Marcus entered and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit down, just stood there looking like he hadn't slept well, his tie slightly loose. His jaw set in that way she'd seen Saturday night when he'd been deciding whether to act or walk away. "I heard about the board meeting. Someone from finance told me what Thornton said. News travels fast. Too fast." Marcus crossed to her desk, his hands in his pockets like he didn't trust what they'd do otherwise. "Victoria, I'm sorry. I didn't think about the consequences, about how it would look, about what it could cost you." The apology landed wrong, making her anger spike in a way that surprised them both. "Didn't think about what? That I'm CEO and you report to me, that this looks like favoritism or poor judgment or any of a dozen other things the board already questions me about every day, that my authority gets challenged constantly, and now I've handed them ammunition." Her voice was sharper than she intended, the frustration of the morning pouring out in his direction because he was there and safe, and somehow part of the problem, even though he'd been trying to help. Marcus took it without defending himself, just stood there and let her words hit him like he deserved them. "You're right. I was selfish. I saw you hurting and I acted without thinking about what it would mean for you. If you want me to transfer departments or resign, I understand." That stopped her. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone willing to sacrifice his career because he'd made a mistake, trying to do something decent. The anger drained out of her as fast as it had risen, leaving exhaustion in its place. "No, that's not what I want. I'm not angry at you, Marcus. I'm angry at the situation, at the fact that I spent 20 years building credibility and one moment gets it questioned." She sat down suddenly, exhausted, and gestured to the chair across from her. Marcus sat, his posture careful, like he was trying to take up less space. "What do you want to do?" The question was simple and devastating. Victoria looked at the rose on her desk, at the reminder of Saturday night, at the possibility it represented. I don't know. What I want and what I should do feel very different right now. What do you want? She met his eyes, saw genuine concern there, genuine question, no agenda behind it. I want to not feel like I have to choose between being happy and being respected. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Then we make this work, properly. We document everything. Keep the relationship separate from work. No favoritism. I decline any opportunities that come from knowing you, but we don't hide. We don't sneak. We're honest. If people have problems, we face them, together. Victoria was surprised by his clarity, by the plan he'd clearly been thinking through while she'd been spiraling. You've thought about this all weekend. I knew this was coming. And you still want to try? Yes, do you? Victoria looked at him, at this IT director who'd saved her from humiliation and was now willing to navigate corporate bureaucracy to make something work that had no guarantee of working. She did the math, calculated risk versus reward. Professional cost versus personal possibility. Yes, but we do this right. HR meeting, disclosure, no secrets. Marcus nodded immediately. Agreed. Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, they sat in Patricia Donovan's office on the 8th floor. Pat was 45, sharp-eyed, with red hair going gray at the temples and an Irish accent that only appeared when she was tired or angry. Right now she looked alert and professional, a yellow legal pad in front of her covered with notes in neat handwriting. Let me make sure I understand. You're disclosing a personal relationship that began outside of work, and you want to ensure company policy is followed to avoid any conflicts of interest. Victoria nodded. Exactly. We want to be transparent and do this properly. Pat looked at Marcus. Mr. Reed, do you feel pressured in any way, any concern that refusing this relationship could affect your employment? No. If anything, I initiated the interaction that started this. Pat made notes, her pen moving quickly across the page. Company policy allows relationships between employees provided they're disclosed and don't create direct reporting conflicts. Since you currently fall under Ms. Brennan's organizational structure, we'll need to adjust that. You'll report directly to the CTO, Warren Mitchell, removing any chain of command issues. She looked up at both of them. I need to be clear about what you're signing up for. Victoria, as CEO, you'll face more scrutiny. Every decision involving IT will be examined for favoritism, even if there isn't any. Marcus, people will assume you're getting special treatment regardless of your actual performance. You'll both need thick skin. They nodded. Pat pushed papers across her desk. Sign these. Acknowledge you've read the policy, understand the implications. Agree to annual ethics training and immediate disclosure of any concerns or complaints. They signed. Pat collected the papers, filed them precisely, then looked at them with something that might have been sympathy. Off the record, this is going to be harder than you think. Not because of the relationship itself, but because of what people will project onto it. Be prepared. They left her office together, walking to the parking garage in silence that felt heavier than it should have. In the concrete dimness between levels, Marcus stopped. Friday night, my place or yours? Victoria felt the weight of the day pressing down the board meeting, and Thornton's implications and Pat's warning all combining into something that felt suddenly very real and very complicated. Yours. I'd like to meet Lily. If you're ready for that. Marcus's expression shifted, surprise and something like fear crossing his face before settling into determination. She gets back Thursday, Friday works. But Victoria meeting her means this is serious. She'll know. 7-year-olds are perceptive. I can't introduce you as just a friend. I know. And if this doesn't work out, if we try and it falls apart, she'll know that too. She'll have questions I won't know how to answer. Victoria reached out and touched his arm briefly, a small gesture of reassurance. Then we try not to let it fall apart. They got in their separate cars and drove to their separate homes, the weight of disclosure and documentation making what had felt spontaneous on Saturday night feel measured and intentional now. Neither of them was sure if that made it more real or just more fragile. Thursday evening, Margaret Brennan arrived at Victoria's apartment without warning. The doorbell rang at 7:15. Victoria opened the door to find her mother standing in the hallway wearing a designer coat and carrying a Hermes bag and an expression that promised confrontation. "We need to talk." Margaret walked in without waiting for invitation, setting her bag on the entryway table with the kind of precision that suggested she'd be staying until she got what she came for. Victoria closed the door and followed her mother into the living room. "Robert called me. He was quite upset, said you embarrassed him, that some man publicly claimed you in front of other people." "Robert said I was too old for any man. I didn't embarrass him. He embarrassed himself." Margaret turned to face her daughter, chin lifted in that particular way that meant she'd already made up her mind and was just going through the formality of conversation. "I did some research. Marcus Reed, IT director at your company. Divorced, single father, modest salary. Victoria, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking he treated me with more respect in one evening than Robert managed in 30 minutes. Respect doesn't pay bills or provide social standing. You need stability, someone from your world, someone who understands the life you've built." Victoria felt something harden in her chest, frustration crystallizing into clarity. "I have stability. I built it myself. What I need is someone who sees me as a person, not a resume or a status symbol or a biological failure." Margaret's eyes flashed hurt and anger mixing together. "I want you to be happy, but love isn't enough. You need practical considerations, resources, position. Robert was your last good option at your age. After 46, Victoria, men want younger women. That's reality. Then maybe I'm done with reality and ready to try something that actually feels real." They stared at each other across the living room, years of similar arguments hanging between them like old smoke. Margaret picked up her bag with decisive finality. "If you pursue this, don't expect me to support it. Our social circle will talk. People will question your judgment. You're making a mistake you'll regret." She left without saying goodbye, the door closing with the kind of quiet that felt louder than slamming. Victoria stood in the sudden silence of her apartment, her mother's words echoing in the space Margaret had just vacated. The old voice in her head agreed with everything Margaret had said. Too old, wrong choice, headed for regret. But another voice, newer and stronger, pushed back against the old certainty. Victoria picked up her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, everything okay? My mother just left. She knows about us. She's not happy." Silence for 3 heartbeats. Then Marcus's voice, steady and certain. "Do you want me to come over?" Victoria surprised herself by answering without hesitation. "Yes, please." 40 minutes later, Marcus arrived with Chinese takeout and an expression that suggested he'd been expecting this call since Saturday night. They sat on her couch with containers open between them. The mundane domesticity of shared food somehow more intimate than any conversation they'd had so far. Victoria told him everything Margaret had said. All the objections and warnings and predictions of social disaster. Marcus listened without interrupting his chopsticks, moving slowly through lo mein while she talked. When she finished, he set his container down and looked at her directly. "She's not wrong about some things. I'm not wealthy. I do have a daughter to consider. Socially, we're from different worlds, but facts aren't the whole truth." He shifted closer, closing some of the distance between them. "The truth is, I see you, not CEO Brennan. Victoria. The woman who gets nervous before board meetings even though she's brilliant, who drinks coffee cold because she forgets it's there, Who saved my career last year when that server crashed and you didn't blame me even though you could have. Victoria felt tears threaten and pushed them back. You remember that? I remember everything about you. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. Marcus reached up slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered there, warm against her skin. I don't care what your mother thinks, or Thornton, or anyone else. I care what you think. Victoria leaned into his touch without meaning to, her body making decisions her mind was still calculating. I think I'm scared, but I'm more scared of not trying. They kissed, then slowly at first, tentative and careful, then deeper as the uncertainty gave way to something more certain. When they pulled apart, Marcus's forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing harder than they had been. Stay tonight. Just stay. Her voice came out quieter than she intended, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been with anyone since David. Marcus nodded against her forehead. I'm not going anywhere. They fell asleep on her couch, fully clothed, the Chinese food forgotten on the coffee table, the television playing something neither of them was watching. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was just two people finding comfort in not being alone. 2 weeks passed in a careful dance of professional distance at work and growing intimacy outside it. They had dinner 3 times, saw a movie once, talked on the phone every night after Lily went to bed, Marcus's voice low and tired and somehow essential. The board meeting incident faded into background noise as new crises took center stage. Victoria stopped checking her phone for her mother's messages. Marcus stopped second-guessing every decision he made at work. Then Thursday of the 3rd week arrived and Marcus picked Lily up from the airport. Stephanie had kept her for 2 weeks in San Diego with her family, the longest stretch Marcus had gone without his daughter since the divorce. He'd spent the entire drive to O'Hare rehearsing how to tell a 7-year-old that her father had started seeing someone, that things were changing in ways that couldn't be taken back. Lily came running through the terminal, dragging her pink rolling suitcase, her braids slightly messy. Her face lit up with excitement about Disneyland and the beach, and her cousin's new puppy. She talked non-stop in the car, filling the silence Marcus had been living in with her particular brand of 7-year-old chaos. He let her talk, soaking in her voice, her presence, the reminder of what mattered most. That night after dinner, while Lily drew at the kitchen table, Marcus sat down across from her. Bug, I need to talk to you about something. Lily looked up, her purple marker paused mid-stroke. Did I do something bad? No, sweetheart, nothing like that. I wanted to tell you that I met someone, a friend. Her name is Victoria. Lily's eyes got sharp the way they did when she was processing information. A friend or a girlfriend? Marcus couldn't help smiling. Maybe girlfriend. Would that be okay? Lily shrugged in that elaborate way children did when they were pretending not to care about something they absolutely cared about. Is she nice? Very nice. She's smart and kind and she makes me smile. Then okay. Can I meet her? Eventually, when you're ready. Lily went back to her drawing, but Marcus could see the wheels turning in her head. Questions forming that she wasn't ready to ask yet. That night at bedtime, when he tucked her in and turned off the light, her small voice stopped him at the door. Daddy, if you have a girlfriend, will you still have time for me? Marcus's heart cracked. He sat back down on her bed, taking her hand in his. Lily Bug, you are the most important person in my life. Always. Nobody changes that. Ever. Promise. Promise. She hugged him tight, her small arms fierce around his neck, and Marcus held on maybe a second longer than necessary before kissing her forehead and leaving the room. Saturday morning, his phone rang. Stephanie's name on the screen made his chest tighten before he even answered. Marcus, we need to talk. I spoke with my lawyer. I want to revisit custody. The words hit like physical blows, knocking the air from his lungs. What? Why Lily's happy here? I heard you're dating someone. Victoria Brennan, your CEO. Marcus's mind raced, trying to figure out how she'd found out, landing on the obvious answer. Small world. Technova had 300 employees and people talked. That has nothing to do with Lily. Doesn't it? You're bringing instability into her life. New relationship, workplace complications, divided attention. My lawyer thinks we have grounds to request primary custody. I'm ready to be a full-time mother now. My partner and I are getting married. We have a stable home, better schools in San Diego. Think about what's best for Lily, Marcus, not your love life. This is blackmail. This is motherhood. Prove to me this relationship is serious and stable, or I file paperwork next week. She hung up. Marcus stood in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to dead air and feeling his world crack apart. Everything he'd feared about letting someone in had just come true. The relationship he'd started endangering the one thing that mattered most. Lily was his entire life, his reason for getting up every morning, his proof that he'd done something right. He couldn't lose her. Wouldn't survive losing her. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. He called Victoria that evening, his voice flat and exhausted when she answered. Can I come over? We need to talk. Those 4 words carried weight they both recognized. Victoria said yes, immediately heard something in his tone that made her pulse quicken. When he arrived 20 minutes later, he looked wrecked, like he hadn't slept in days, even though it had only been hours since Stephanie's call. What happened? Marcus told her everything. The call, the threat, the ultimatum. Victoria's initial anger gave way to understanding as she watched him struggle through the explanation. She can't do this. We've done everything right. HR, disclosure boundaries, everything by the book. Doesn't matter. She'll argue workplace stress, relationship instability, her better resources. And maybe she's right. Maybe bringing you into Lily's life is selfish when everything's still so new and uncertain. Victoria saw where this was going, felt it approaching like weather you could smell on the wind before the storm arrived. Say it. Marcus's voice broke on the words. I can't lose Lily. She's my whole life. This thing between us, it's real. It's the realest thing I've felt in years, but I can't risk my daughter for it. Not yet. Not when it's this new and she can use it against me. I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm so sorry. Victoria felt her heart crack, but forced herself to nod, to understand and not make this harder than it already was. You're a good father. The best. Lily is lucky to have you. I don't want to lose you, but you will. For her. And that's exactly why this mattered. Marcus left 20 minutes later, both of them knowing it was over before it had really begun. Victoria closed the door and slid down it to the floor, finally letting the tears come. Across town, Marcus drove home and sat in his parked car outside his apartment building, his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left, and tried to breathe through the weight of choosing between 2 impossible options. Monday morning, Victoria faced an emergency board meeting where Gerald Thornton called for a vote of no confidence. She defended herself with Q4 numbers and professionalism and the kind of steel control that had gotten her this far. The vote split 4-3 in her favor, barely, and Thornton's parting words echoed in the conference room long after the meeting ended. This isn't over. Victoria sat alone in her office afterward, victorious and hollow, staring at the white rose on her desk that had started to wilt. She'd won the battle and lost the war, kept her job, and given up the possibility of something that might have been worth more than any title. The rose was dead by Wednesday. She still couldn't throw it away. The days after Marcus walked away stretched into a week that felt like punishment for wanting something. Victoria buried herself in work, arriving before the sun and leaving after the cleaning crew started their rounds. Her apartment became a place to shower and change clothes, nothing more. The rose on her desk turned brown at the edges, petals curling inward like something dying slowly in public view. She told herself she'd throw it away tomorrow. Tomorrow became a week. The week became a routine of avoidance. Kelly knocked on her office door Friday afternoon carrying coffee Victoria hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Her assistant had stopped commenting on the hours, the skipped lunches, the way Victoria's suits hung looser than they had 2 weeks ago. "Ms. Brennan, did you hear Marcus Reed gave notice?" The words arrived like news from another country, information that should have felt distant but instead detonated in Victoria's chest. She kept her face still, her voice level, years of executive training kicking in automatically. "What's the timeline?" 2 weeks, taking a VP position in Seattle, global IT security. Warren Mitchell tried to counteroffer, but he'd already made his decision. Kelly set the coffee down and left without waiting for response. Victoria stared at her computer screen, seeing nothing, the text blurring into meaningless patterns. Seattle, 2,000 miles away, the distance felt both impossible and like exactly what she deserved for believing anything could be different this time. She picked up her phone, then set it down. Picked it up again, opened a new message and stared at the blank screen until the words stopped mattering and she closed the app without typing anything. What could she say that wouldn't sound like begging or blaming or both? He'd made his choice. She'd told him she understood. Understanding didn't stop it from feeling like something vital had been removed from her body without anesthesia. The dead rose stared at her from its vase. Victoria grabbed its stem and all and threw it in the trash can beside her desk. The action felt both necessary and wrong, like amputating something that might have healed given enough time. She didn't look at the trash can for the rest of the afternoon. Marcus picked Lily up from school Tuesday at 3:15, the spring sunshine feeling accusatory in its brightness. His daughter climbed into the back seat, her backpack sliding off one shoulder, her hair escaping from the ponytail he'd attempted that morning. She was quiet during the drive home, staring out the window at Chicago sliding past in its usual chaotic patterns. "Daddy, are you sad?" The question came from the back seat, small and certain in the way 7-year-olds were certain when they'd already worked out the answer. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Just tired, bug. You've been tired since Christmas." The observation landed with more accuracy than Marcus wanted to acknowledge. He pulled up to a red light and turned to look at her properly. "Yeah, I have been. Is it because of the girlfriend, Victoria?" Hearing her name in his daughter's voice felt like touching a bruise he'd been trying to ignore. Marcus considered lying, decided Lily deserved better. "Sort of. Grown-up things got complicated. Because of Mommy." The light turned green. Marcus drove, buying time to figure out how to explain adult failure to someone who still believed problems had solutions if you just tried hard enough. Partly. And work. And other things that are hard to put into words. Lily was quiet for 3 blocks. Then her voice came again, smaller this time, like she was afraid of the answer. "Do you love her?" Marcus pulled into their parking space, turned off the engine, and twisted in his seat to face his daughter. Her eyes were wide and serious behind the glasses she hated wearing but needed. "I think I could have. If things had been different." "Then why did you stop?" "Because I love you more. You're my priority. You're what matters most." Lily unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned forward between the front seats. Her small face scrunched in concentration the way it got when she was working through a problem in math class. "Daddy, Mommy told me something once. She said love isn't about choosing. It's about making room." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, understanding arriving too late to help, but early enough to hurt. Your mom said that when she talked about why she left, she said she didn't make room for both of us, that she chose wrong. But she said you're better at making room than she was, that you have a big heart. The wisdom of children sometimes felt like weapons too sharp and too precise to be wielded safely. Marcus pulled Lily into an awkward hug across the center console, her small arms wrapping around his neck with complete faith that he'd figure things out because that's what dads did. I love you, Lilybug. I love you too. But I think you should make room for Victoria too, 'cause you're sad without her. They went upstairs to the apartment and Marcus made dinner while Lily did homework at the kitchen table, and he tried to process the idea that his 7-year-old daughter had seen something he'd missed entirely. That maybe choosing between two people he loved was exactly the wrong framework. That maybe Stephanie's biggest failure hadn't been leaving, but believing she had to pick one thing and abandon the other. Wednesday evening, Marcus's phone rang while he was reviewing server logs that didn't need reviewing anything to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. Stephanie's name on the screen made his jaw tighten reflexively. What now? Marcus, about the custody thing. I'm not filing. The words took a moment to process, arriving in the wrong order, making no sense against the script he'd been expecting. What? I talked to Lily yesterday. She's happy with you, really happy. And she asked me why you couldn't be happy too. Like it was the simplest question in the world. Stephanie's voice carried something Marcus hadn't heard from her in years. Regret, maybe. Or shame. Or just the exhaustion of carrying anger too long. I was scared, Marcus. Scared you'd found something real and Lily wouldn't need me anymore. But that's my problem, not yours. You're a great father. Better than I was a mother for a long time. And Victoria, I looked her up. She seems like a good person. Don't move to Seattle because of me. Stay where you're happy. Marcus sat down because his legs stopped supporting him reliably. I already gave notice. Then ungive it. Fight for what you want. It's not that simple. I hurt her. I chose wrong. She probably doesn't want to hear from me. Stop being scared. You're terrible at it. Stephanie hung up before he could respond. Marcus stared at his phone, at the call that had just rewritten everything he'd been planning, at the possibility that maybe he'd sacrificed the right thing to protect against the wrong threat. He pulled up Warren Mitchell's number, typed out a message asking if they could talk tomorrow morning about the Seattle position, and hit send before he could second-guess himself into paralysis. Thursday morning, Victoria scheduled a meeting with Gerald Thornton. Not requested. Scheduled. Kelly had looked concerned when Victoria dictated the calendar invite, but she'd sent it anyway because she'd worked for Victoria long enough to know when arguments were useless. Thornton arrived at the conference room at 10 o'clock, looking smug, like he'd been waiting for this meeting since the day Victoria became CEO. He sat across from her with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Victoria, to what do I owe the pleasure? I'm done playing defense with you, Gerald. Her voice came out harder than she'd intended, but softer than she felt. Thornton's eyebrows raised slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. Yes, you do. You've been undermining me since I took this position. Every board meeting, every decision, every opportunity to question my judgment. So let's have the conversation we've been avoiding for 4 years. She leaned forward, hands flat on the table between them. You didn't want me as CEO because I'm a woman. Because I came up through product management instead of finance. Because I don't have the right pedigree or the right family name or whatever metric you're using to decide who deserves respect. But here's what's true: Q4 numbers don't lie. Neither do Q1 projections or client retention rates or market share growth. I've outperformed every target this board set, and you still can't accept that competence matters more than credentials. Thornton started to speak, but Victoria kept going. So here's what's happening. I'm staying CEO. You can challenge me again if you want, but bring actual performance issues, not gossip about my personal life. Because my personal life is exactly that, personal. If I date an IT director or a janitor or an astronaut, that's my business. It doesn't affect my ability to run this company. Are we clear? The room felt charged with something electric and dangerous. Thornton studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time, recognizing something he'd previously dismissed. He nodded slowly. Crystal. Victoria stood up, the meeting over because she said it was over. She walked back to her office feeling 10 feet tall and simultaneously terrified that the adrenaline would wear off and reveal she'd just committed career suicide. But Kelly was smiling when Victoria passed her desk, and that felt like winning even if she didn't know what prize she'd earned. Friday morning started wrong and got worse. Victoria arrived to find Marcus's office in the IT wing. Half-packed boxes stacked along the walls. His laptop already disconnected from the docking station. She stood in the doorway for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes before someone noticed her. Ms. Brennan, can I help you? A junior technician whose name Victoria didn't know looked genuinely confused about why the CEO was standing in their department. Victoria found her voice. Marcus Reed. Where is he? Server room. Hardware migration. You want me to get him? No, thank you. She walked to the server room like she was approaching a cliff edge, knowing the drop existed but unable to stop moving forward. The room was cold and loud, fluorescent lights harsh overhead, the smell of electronics and recycled air thick enough to taste. Marcus was on the floor with cables spread around him like he was performing surgery, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie nowhere in evidence. He looked up when the door opened, froze when he saw who'd walked in. Victoria. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you. Now's really not the best time. I'm in the middle of... Now is perfect. She let the door close behind her, the sound echoing in the metallic space. Marcus stood up, brushing dust from his knees, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen him look before. I heard you're leaving. Seattle. VP position. It's a good opportunity. Is that why you're taking it, or are you running? The directness landed between them like a challenge. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's not fair. You're right. Nothing about this is fair. Victoria took 3 steps closer, closing the distance between them to something less than professional, more than cautious. You walked into that coffee shop and changed everything for me. You stood up when no one else would. You made me believe I deserved more than settling, and then you walked away without fighting. I had to protect Lily. Stephanie called me. Did you know that Wednesday morning? She tracked down my personal number somehow. She apologized, said she wasn't filing the custody challenge, that she was scared and stupid, and Lily is happy with you, which means you're leaving for nothing. Marcus looked like he'd been hit. His expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope before settling on exhaustion. She called you. She said Lily asked her why you couldn't be happy. Simple question. 7-year-old logic. Your daughter wants you to have room in your life for both of you. Your ex-wife apparently agrees. The only person stopping you is you. The machinery hummed around them, filling the silence while Marcus processed information that should have arrived days ago but hadn't. Victoria watched him struggle with it, saw the moment the walls he'd built started cracking. I'm scared. Scared of messing this up, scared of letting Lily down. Scared that you'll realize I'm exactly what everyone said I am, not enough. Victoria closed the remaining distance between them. I'm scared too. Scared of my mother's judgment and Thornton's interference and failing at another relationship. But I'm more scared of living my whole life safe and alone, wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to try. What are you saying? Don't go to Seattle. Stay. Try. With me. For real. I'll make room in my life for both of you, Work and Lily and us, but I need you to stay and fight for this. Marcus reached out slowly, his hand finding her face, thumb brushing her cheek like he was checking if she was real. I never accepted the Seattle position. I told Warren I needed time to think. Called him yesterday and withdrew my name. I was trying to figure out how to fix things when Stephanie called. Relief and frustration hit Victoria simultaneously. So we're both idiots. Apparently. They stood in the server room surrounded by machines that kept Technova running, and Marcus kissed her like he should have kissed her days ago, like he was done running from things that scared him. A junior technician walked in, saw them, and backed out immediately with a muttered apology. They broke apart laughing. Everyone's going to know now. Good. Let them. Saturday afternoon, Victoria met Marcus and Lily at the park 3 blocks from his apartment. The March sunshine felt premature, promising warmth it couldn't quite deliver, but Lily didn't seem to care as she ran ahead with her backpack full of art supplies. Victoria stood next to a bench, her hands in her coat pockets, her heart beating harder than any board meeting had ever made it beat. Lily approached with the careful assessment children gave to adults who might become important. She was smaller than Victoria had imagined from Marcus's descriptions, her dark hair in 2 braids, her glasses slightly crooked. You're Victoria. Not a question, an identification. Victoria smiled despite her nerves. I am. You must be Lily. Daddy says you're his girlfriend. Are you? I hope so. Is that okay with you? Lily tilted her head, considering this question with the seriousness it deserved. He's been sad without you. I don't like when he's sad. I don't like it either. Then I guess it's okay. Do you like drawing? They sat on the grass despite the chill, and Lily pulled out markers and paper, launching into an explanation of her latest art project, with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a captive audience. Victoria listened and asked questions and tried not to overthink the fact that a 7-year-old was currently deciding whether she was acceptable. Marcus sat beside them, quiet, watching them interact with an expression Victoria couldn't quite read but felt like hope. Lily drew a picture: Marcus, Victoria, Lily, a house, a dog that didn't exist yet. Hearts floating around all of them like blessing or wish or both. She handed it to Victoria solemnly. For you, so you remember we're a family now. Victoria's throat tightened. She took the drawing carefully like it was something precious and breakable. Thank you. I'll keep it somewhere safe. In your office so you see it when you work. Exactly there. They stayed at the park for 2 hours until the sun started dropping and the temperature with it. Lily ran ahead to the car, giving Marcus and Victoria a moment alone on the path. Marcus reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. That went better than I expected. She's wonderful. She is. But Victoria, this is real now. You're meeting my daughter, being part of her life. If this falls apart later, she'll remember, she'll be hurt. I need to know you're in this. Victoria squeezed his hand. I'm in this, all the way. We'll figure out the complicated parts as we go. 2 weeks later, Victoria arranged brunch at an upscale place downtown Neutral Territory for what would either be reconciliation or warfare. She'd called Margaret on Tuesday, leaving a voicemail that was more summons than invitation. Her mother arrived exactly on time, which meant she'd been early and waited in her car to make her entrance precise. Marcus and Lily were already seated when Margaret walked in. Victoria stood to greet her mother, watching calculation happen behind Margaret's eyes as she assessed Marcus's suit. Lily's dress, the way they'd arranged themselves at the table like they belonged together. Mother, thank you for coming. Victoria. Margaret sat, accepted a menu she wouldn't read, and turned her attention to Lily with the kind of smile adults gave children they were trying to impress. You must be Lily. I'm Victoria's mother. Hi, are you a grandmother? You look like one. The bluntness of children's observations landed in the middle of the table like a grenade with the pin pulled. Marcus looked mortified. Victoria fought not to laugh. Margaret's expression shifted into something softer. I suppose I am old enough to be one, yes. Do you like grandkids? 'Cause I'm pretty good at being a kid. I imagine you are. The brunch proceeded with the careful choreography of people trying not to trigger explosions. Margaret asked Marcus about his background with the precision of a prosecutor establishing motive. He answered honestly, not hiding his self-taught career or his divorce or his modest origins. Margaret watched Lily with something that might have been curiosity or might have been judgment. When Lily excused herself to go to the bathroom and Marcus followed to help, Margaret turned to Victoria. He's not what I imagined. What did you imagine? Someone taking advantage, but I see how he looks at you, how she looks at both of you. This is serious. Victoria nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I still think you deserve someone from your world, someone with your education and resources, but I see you're happy. That counts for something. It wasn't approval. It wasn't blessing. It was the smallest possible acknowledgement that maybe Victoria's choices weren't complete disasters. Victoria took what she could get. It's enough, Mother. It's a start. They finished brunch with the kind of civility that passed for peace in their family. Margaret left with a stiff hug and a promise to call soon. Marcus, Victoria, and Lily walked to Navy Pier afterward, let Lily ride the carousel twice. Bought overpriced ice cream they didn't finish. It felt normal in a way nothing had felt normal in months. 6 months passed in the strange acceleration time took when life was finally moving in the right direction. Victoria taught Lily about business during Friday night dinners at her apartment, explaining what CEOs did in language a 7-year-old could understand. Marcus taught Victoria to cook, standing behind her in the kitchen, correcting her knife technique and making her laugh when recipes went wrong. Lily drew, constantly filling both apartments with crayon portraits of their expanding family that now included a dog they hadn't gotten yet, and a house they didn't live in together yet. Work settled into a new rhythm. Marcus reported to Warren Mitchell, directly eliminating any appearance of favoritism. Victoria and Marcus had lunch together in Technova's cafeteria like any other couple, and people stopped gossiping after the first month because there was nothing scandalous to report. Thornton stayed quiet through 2 board meetings. Margaret called every Sunday and only criticized Victoria's choices 40% of the time, which counted as progress. Stephanie visited in July, meeting Victoria over coffee with the awkwardness of 2 women navigating the complicated geometry of loving the same child and the same man at different times. They were never going to be friends, but they managed polite, and that was enough. Christmas Eve arrived again 1 year after the night that changed everything. Marcus had reserved the same corner table at Lakefront Coffee, and Victoria arrived at 8 o'clock to find him waiting with that same nervous energy he'd had the first time. He had a small wrapped box on the table between them. 1 year ago, I did something crazy here. Victoria smiled, settling into the chair across from him. You told a CEO she was perfect. I told you were perfect. I still believe that. He pushed the box across the table. Victoria opened it to find a key, simple and silver against the black velvet lining. She looked up, confused. It's to my apartment. Well, our apartment, if you want it to be. Marcus's hands were shaking, slightly nervous energy making his words come faster than usual. I know we've been taking it slow. Split custody, separate places, being careful. But Lily asked me last week when you were moving in, and I realized I'm ready, if you are. Victoria turned the key over in her fingers, feeling the weight of what he was offering. This is more than moving in together. I know. I'm asking if you want to build a life with me, with us. No timeline, no pressure, just commitment to figuring it out together. Will you? Victoria thought about the woman who'd sat in this coffee shop a year ago, believing she was too old and too broken and too late for anything good to happen. She thought about the man who'd crossed the room to prove her wrong. She thought about the 7-year-old girl who drew pictures of families that didn't exist yet but might. Yes. The word came out certain and clear. Victoria closed her hand around the key. Yes to moving in. Yes to building a life. Yes to all of it. Marcus smiled the kind of smile that transformed his whole face and ordered them coffee they wouldn't drink while they talked about logistics and timing and what came next. Outside the window, snow fell again, marking the anniversary with symmetry that felt almost too perfect. Marcus showed her a picture on his phone drawn by Lily that morning. Marcus, Victoria, Lily, a dog, a house, hearts everywhere. She made this for you. Said to give it to you tonight. Victoria looked at the drawing at the family Lily had been sketching into existence for months. Tell her I love it. Tell her I love both of you. She knows, but I'll tell her anyway. They left the coffee shop at 10, walking to their separate cars that would soon become unnecessary when they shared an address. Marcus kissed her under the streetlight snow, catching in her hair and his coat. And Victoria felt certain in a way she hadn't felt certain about anything in years. 6 months later, they closed on a 3-bedroom townhouse in Wicker Park with a yard big enough for the dog Lily had already named. Moving day was chaos, boxes everywhere, Lily directing traffic like a tiny General Marcus carrying furniture. Victoria assembling a bookshelf with instructions that made no sense in any language. They ordered pizza when the kitchen proved too full of unpacked dishes to cook in. Eating on the floor of the empty living room while Lily chattered about her new school and her new room and the dog they'd get next month. Lily found a box labeled in Victoria's handwriting, personal items. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the dried white rose in a simple frame. Lily held it up, curious. What's this? A flower your dad gave me the night we met. It's dead, though, but it's beautiful. It reminds me of something important. What? That beautiful things can last if you take care of them. Marcus helped Victoria hang the frame in the living room, centered above the couch where everyone would see it. Lily stepped back to admire their work. Now everyone knows the story. Exactly. They finished unpacking the essentials by midnight. Lily fell asleep on the couch between them, exhausted from excitement and moving boxes. Marcus carried her to her new room, tucking her into a bed that hadn't been slept in yet, but would become familiar soon enough. He came back to find Victoria standing in front of the framed rose. Her arms crossed, a small smile on her face. Think we can actually do this? We already are. They stood in their new home, surrounded by boxes that would become their shared life. And Victoria thought about all the years she'd spent believing her story was over, that the good parts had already passed. She thought about the moment a stranger had crossed a coffee shop to tell her she was wrong. She thought about the daughter who'd drawn them into existence before reality caught up. She thought about love arriving late and messy and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for. Through the window, Chicago's skyline glowed against the night sky. The framed rose hung on the wall, a monument to dead things that still mattered. Lily's drawing was already on the refrigerator. Their lives were tangled together now in ways that couldn't be easily undone, and Victoria wouldn't have it any other way. She was 47 years old, CEO, stepmother, partner, human. Her mother still called with criticisms. The board still watched. Life was still complicated and sometimes hard, but she wasn't alone anymore, and that made everything else survivable. Marcus came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "That I was just waiting for someone brave enough to see me, and for me to be brave enough to see myself. And now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Outside, the city moved through its endless rhythm. Inside their home, three people who'd found each other against improbable odds were building something that might last. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth it. Victoria closed her eyes and leaned back into Marcus's warmth, and felt for the first time in more years than she could count completely certain that she'd made the right choice.